Let's have a look at this vertical conical object. You can see that the top of the cone is a highly reflective metallic finish like a stainless steel, and it sits on an orange transparent base. You can communicate different types of metallic finishes depending on how much black is shown. So say with aluminium, you don't get to see a lot of harsh contrast reflections. Stainless steel, you see a little bit more, and that's why you have a bit more black. And then the extreme would be chromium really is like a mirror, and it reflects only what is seen in the environment. So you tend to have a lot of blacks and a lot of white, or if it's a color, it's the color that's reflected from the environment. With the transparency, just like what we did previously, you can see that we have layering underneath in grays, and then we build the shape and form and the sharpness of features at the front to show that depth and transparency. With this conical object turned on its side, you can see I'm rendering it with the same lighting scenario from the top right. The front of the cone is rendered as a matte finish, similar to what we've done previously, but because I'm including painted highlights, it turns that into a more satin metallic finish. The back of the cone is rendered more in a polished aluminium, and you can see it's got some scalloped features at the back. So when we render highly reflective materials like a glossy surface, whether that's in a color or just raw metal, we tend to reference the landscape scene where you'll have sky tone, a horizon line, which is usually very dark when you look out into a vista, and then the foreground progressively gets lighter away from that horizon line. And because we are rendering an inanimate object, we tend to have that horizon line showing the true form of what we're rendering. And you can see that that horizon line is pointing directly at the point of this cone because that's the nature of its form. Okay, so let's get started and I'll show you how to render these two conical objects. Okay, so I'm going to start off by adding some internal features to this transparent base, similar to the boxes that we just did. I'm just going to indicate possibly a wall thickness of that transparent material. I'm just using a number 3. And this is going to add the details that we see internal value behind the object. Here I'm just using a bit of license, a bit of looseness. And I'm using quite a light marker. Light source direction, a little bit of cast shadow on that horizontal surface. Now I'm going to establish the position of the reflections. I want to make sure that those reflections are aligned along the surface of that cone. So you can take a ruler and just using a very light line with this black pencil, I'm going to establish a position of a reflection. I'm going to think about the width of the highlight that I'm going to leave. That's going to be based on the light source direction and my cast shadow. And then probably about here, drop in another line for the reflective, highly reflective material. That's going to be the horizon line I just mentioned. And here is going to be the center of the core of this transparent base. So now I've got those guidelines, I can just start to put in some reflective tone through this top cone. The objective is to keep it nice and dark at the front. Remember, we're going to enhance this with with pencils later on. And I don't have to overwork it. And that's pretty much it. With the base of this metallic part of the cone, I'm just going to, again with a light 3, sort of mimic that. You can see that the angle, this is a cone upside down, and I'm aiming for a point where that cone would meet, or the point of that cone would be, and just being pretty economical with how much marker I put down. Remember, this is a light color, a light value, it's number 3. I can come back now that that section's dried a little. And it's this material finish where if it's streaky, that's fine. This is not a matte tonal value rendering. Okay. For the transparent base, again, I'm going to use that line that I drew as a guide and just going to establish in my color, and I'm using this YR04, some reflections at the front. I can trace over the underside, so that's got like a rolling lip. Remember, we can enhance these details with pencil. This is just base value. And that's the thing, you know, don't sort of freak out if you make mistakes. As long as it's reasonably accurate, the position and the shape and form that you're trying to communicate, then we can enhance those details with pencil. And you can see that this orange line here isn't on the guideline that I drew. It's because this is transparent, but it's not as glossy as metal. So this is a bit of a shadow core that I'm going to build. I'm going to throw some grey on that later on. And you'll see as we progress with the rendering what I mean by that. On the horizontal surface of this base, I might see a reflection of this on that surface. So that's what that is. This has a radius lip on the leading edge. So what might happen is this reflection here might flick. And because this is the darker section of our render, I'm also going to just roll this around into that shadow side. So now I just want to add a bit more contrast. Now that this is nice and dry, I'm still using just the 3 and just darkening that horizon line. That's about it. I'm also going to enhance, because we've got color now, yeah? So this detail underneath tells me I can go a little darker, still using this 3. It's just a matter of layering, watching what's going on and seeing if anything needs additional value. I'm also going to run through, I've included the cast shadow here, right? And this part of the cast shadow is actually orange because it's the base of this cone that's transparent. So I'm going to run my orange, which is that cast shadow, and I'm going to use my 3 over that orange to knock back the intensity of that cast shadow. I'm going to leave this section here because this is at the front of this curved face. While I'm here, I'm going to add some core value. I'm just using a light, this is a number 1. In fact, I can go darker than that. So switching to number 3. And just in the center of that core, you can see I'm just layering. That's the cast shadow. That might be a 5 later on. Again, I'll adjust depending as I'm progressing. It tells me whether I need more contrast in areas or not. The underside of this metallic, like a cup here, is pointing downwards, if you like. So I'm just going to modify it so that it looks like it's a little darker. And I'm very well aware that I'm going to do some detailing with pencil on that later on. I might just at this stage just drop in my little bit of 3 on this cast shadow for the top of that cone. Just using a number 3 just as a place marker. I want to add some contrast now using a number 5. I'm leaving it streaky. and just up here. Might just give this another hit. This is a number 3 on that core. I think now we're about ready to do some detail work. So I know that white pencil doesn't work well on black pencil. So sometimes you've just got to work out which to do first. At this stage, I'm just going to do the highlights on the edges of these little slots on the top of the cone. So remember, on the underside of that black line is the top edge of this part of that little feature. So I'm just using a white pencil, picking up the highlight edge, nice and sharp. And this is first pass because we're going to have painted highlights on here. You can also enhance that later on. Now with the black pencil, I'm going to punch up that horizon line. Just want to make that nice and straight. I want to avoid the white pencil areas. So it's just sharpened up that edge. And now I'm just going to grade it a little bit. You can see it's starting to reflect or show reflectivity. White pencil, bit of reflected light on that side and on this side. Okay, so just a quick reminder about this whole landscape scene. So if we can see, I've actually got the original rendering, and there's our horizon line and there's our sky tone, and on the foreground it gets a little bit lighter. And that blue is the classic, showing chromium or aluminium with sky tone. I'm going to do the sky tone blue on the cone that's tipped on its side, but for this one I'm going to show you that you can still use black and it'll still look highly reflective. So to start off with the so-called sky tone, I'm just going to use a really light grade. This is a C1, and I'm just going to drop it right in the middle. Importantly is not to lose the white on the left and right. And then black pencil in the center of that core and just fade it slightly. We also want to make sure it looks like it's tapering to the point. This is a pretty small rendering, so I'm just going to take some care to darken that center and make sure it looks like it's going right up to that point. Again, being very careful not to overwork it, not to pick up an edge. It's just to replicate that sheen of tone. And you can come back and enhance this later on if it needs it. Just work light to dark. For that same highlight area for the transparent base, I'm going to use a color matched pencil to the orange YR04 that I'm using. And this is similar to using a black pencil with your gray markers. You can use colored pencils with your colored markers to do the detail work. So here I'm just going to use my YR04, try and be pretty light, and then use my pencil to come in and fade across and not lose that white. And just to intensify the center of that, I might just use a little bit of black pencil. So leading up to my final detail work before painted highlights, I just want to have a look at any areas that I want to enhance some detail. Remember, this is a reflected area, so you tend to have highlights and refractions of light all over the place. Sometimes it's good to be economical with this. It'll come with practice. I've made a lot of mistakes. Sometimes less is more. But we're just enhancing here. Okay. So that's a lip that's turning under. You might get some bounce light popping up into there. This is main highlight area, so the underside would receive quite a bit of bounce light. And again, I'm showing you more of finished rendering. Of course, you can limit how much of this detail work you do when you are trying to render transparent finishes in ideation sketching. So once you're happy with all the detail work, the last, of course, is painted highlights. So we're going to think about where our light source is coming from, looking at the shape of our form. I'm going to have highlights that are right through the center of this core. I might start off at the top here, on that point. I'm not going to flare the highlight as I did with white pencil in the previous exercise, previous rendering, because I've got a lot of pencil here, and that white pencil is going to go quite muddy. With the highlight though, as I get onto a larger diameter ellipse, if you like, the highlight also will thicken. Okay, so it's not just a series of dots. They're going to slightly get wider depending on the diameter of that ellipse. And then here, of course, it's the larger rim, so I'm going to make a larger highlight. My contrast in the white pencil is quite good, so I'm not worried about the flaring of white pencil. And then this is the major highlight through here. And even though you've got pencil work, orange marker, grey marker, black pencil, you can use the pencil, you can use this highlight pen almost like an eraser and just get a good shape of highlight. Like I said, you can use the highlight pen as an eraser to shape your marker work. Again, this is for a more finished rendering, of course, right? Some minor highlights on the refracted area. Again, I'm trying to keep these all in alignment. You can see how it's nice and glossy now, really reflective. And I want those in line to the form. Maybe just one more. I'm just going to shape this a little bit more. I think that'll do it. Okay, so here's the completed rendered view with line work definition and the cast shadow rendered in. With the cylinder tipped on its side, I'm going to be doing this all in fast forward, except for when I describe how I'm rendering these little scallop details. Essentially it's the same, it's a conical form, and if you see from that same view, but just positioned vertically, I'm considering the same alignment of my marker strokes just to accurately communicate essentially what is a conical form. Okay, so for the sky tone, I'm using a B41. You can use a B00. Both of those are really good for water and sky. I'm going to follow the same direction to the point. I don't want to go too far and lose the white because the intention is to show depth of core. With these scallop areas here, that's pointing up towards the sky, as is that part. This tucks under, and then this section here is pointing upwards. So just a touch of that blue. Using a color matched pencil to my B41 blue. Again, pay attention to the direction of the point. And just like what we do with black pencil, I'm doing with blue. And I'm just deepening that core and just grading it. Make sure you don't lose the white. If you do, it will lose its high reflective appearance. Okay, just shaping that. A little bit on these scallops. So you already saw that I did the black and white pencil work for this satin finish of the front of the cone. Now I'm going to pick up all the highlight edges that are facing towards light source. My light source is in this direction, so I'm picking up this edge, and the edges of the ellipses. And here I'm just going to redefine some line work in preparation for my painted highlights and final detail pass. So just some final black pencil detail work in preparation for my painted highlights. And the painted highlights. Okay, so there's the completed view. Now let's have a look at the last one, which is that vertical cylinder with the chrome, transparent dome, and the textured center.